My retirement gift to myself was a cabin. Not just any cabin, but a gorgeous frame on a pristine lake, surrounded by whispering pines. It was my reward after 30 years of navigating the concrete jungle as a police chief. 30 years of politics, paperwork, and the worst humanity had to offer. All I wanted was to fish, read, and listen to the loons. But instead of the loons, I got Cynthia, the HOA president who called 911 on me for trespassing on my own property the first day I moved in. She thought she was calling the cavalry to run off a squatter. Man, the look on her face when the responding officers saluted me instead. It was priceless. You want to hear how it all went down? Stick around, because this story is just wild. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from, and let's get into it. It all started on a crisp Monday morning, 7:14 a.m. The sun was just starting to burn the mist off the lake. I was on my brand new deck, coffee mug in hand, just soaking it all in. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. This was it. This was the peace I'd been chasing for decades. I'd closed on the place the Friday before, and the moving truck had just pulled away maybe an hour ago. The boxes were stacked to the ceiling inside, but that was a problem for future me. Present me was in heaven. For about 20 minutes. Then I heard the crunch of sensible shoes on my gravel driveway. I looked over, and there she was. A woman who looked like her face was permanently stuck smelling something foul. She was about 55, maybe 56, with a helmet of perfectly lacquered blonde hair that defied the gentle morning breeze. She had a clipboard. A clipboard, dude? That's never a good sign. You must be the new owner, she said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I'm Cynthia, she announced, president of the Lakeview Meadows Homeowners Association. Wow, this woman was unbelievable. She had this way of speaking that was somehow both syrupy sweet and dripping with condescension. She handed me a binder that must have been 3 inches thick. This is a welcome packet, she chirped. It contains our community bylaws, covenants, and guidelines. I suggest you familiarize yourself with them immediately. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the cover. We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain standard here. I just smiled, took the binder, and said, "Thanks. Looking forward to being a part of the community." Her eyes narrowed just a little. I could practically see her thinking, "We'll see about that." She gave my cabin a slow, critical once-over, her gaze lingering on a stray box a mover had left on the porch, and then she turned and marched off. Man, it was shocking how quickly the peaceful vibe evaporated. The first warning shot had been fired. I hadn't even unpacked my toothbrush, and I already had the feeling this wasn't going to be the tranquil retirement I'd imagined. That binder, by the way, it wasn't a welcome packet. It was a declaration of war. It detailed everything from the acceptable shade of beige for your trim to the maximum allowable height for a gnome in your garden. I'm not even kidding. 2 inches. Your gnome could not be taller than 2 inches. I flipped through the pages, my coffee getting cold. This was more complex than the city penal code I'd spent my career enforcing. The next few weeks were a blur of petty nonsense. It was like I'd aged an entire permit in a single month. My first official violation notice arrived on a Thursday. It was from my mailbox. Apparently, it was forest green, when the approved HOA color was evergreen. Dude, they were virtually identical. I got another one because the small American flag I'd put by my door was mounted on a wooden dowel, not the board-approved anodized aluminum pole. A fine of $50 accompanied that one. Then came the issue of my boat. I have a simple 16-foot aluminum fishing boat. Nothing fancy, but she's been good to me for years. According to Cynthia, it was an eyesore that detracted from the natural aesthetic of the lake. I was supposed to keep it in my garage. I explained that my garage was currently full of, boxes. From moving. Her response? A crisp email reminding me of the daily fine for improper vehicle storage. It was insane. It felt like I was being hazed. I am a 50-year-old man, a retired police chief, for crying out loud. And I'm being harassed over a gnome-sized flagpole. Cynthia. She must have been destined to have that name, even though it was Cynthia. She embodied the spirit of every petty tyrant I'd ever had the displeasure of dealing with. She was a master of weaponizing mediocrity. The bylaws were her shield and her sword, and she wielded them with the righteous fury of a warlord defending a kingdom of beige houses. It was then I knew this wasn't something I could just ignore. This wasn't about a mailbox. This was about control. And I'll be damned if I was going to let some power-tripping clipboard commando dictate how I lived in my own home after the life I'd led. My career had been about fighting bullies of a different sort, but a bully is a bully, whether they're holding a gun or a 3-ring binder. I started talking to my neighbors, trying to get a feel for the place. Most of them were nice, but scared. I met an older couple, the Hendersons, who had been there for 20 years. 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was out struggling with a lawnmower I hadn't used in a decade, and Mr. Henderson came over to offer a hand. He was a kind man with gentle eyes that held a hint of weary resignation. After a few pleasantries, his wife, Mary, brought us some lemonade. She looked over her shoulder, a gesture that seemed almost reflexive, before leaning in and whispering, "You've met Cynthia, then?" I chuckled. "You could say that. She seems thorough." Mary's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thorough is one word for it," she said softly. "Be careful, Mr. Miller. She doesn't like people who push back. We had a lovely family, the Jacksons, right over there." She gestured to a nearby house. "They tried to get a playset for their kids, a nice wooden one. Cynthia found a loophole in the bylaws about unapproved structures. Fined them into the ground. They had to sell. She bankrupted them with legal fees. Man, it was chilling. This wasn't just a quirky, overzealous HOA president. This woman was a menace, ruining lives over swing sets." Mr. Henderson added, "She runs that board like it's her own personal fiefdom." The other two members, a fella named Gary and a woman named Brenda, they just do whatever she says. They're either scared of her or benefiting from it somehow. This information was a game changer. It elevated the situation from a personal annoyance to a community problem. Cynthia wasn't just a nuisance. She was a predator, preying on people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. The Jackson story really got under my skin. My whole career, I'd stood up for victims. I wasn't about to stop now. This was my home, and these were my neighbors. So I did what I know how to do. I started an investigation. It felt like a lifetime ago, what felt like a whole tidal search of paperwork and dead ends. My first stop was the county clerk's office. I spent an entire Friday afternoon, 1:15 p.m. to closing time, pulling every document I could find on the Lakeview Meadows HOA. I got the articles of incorporation from when it was founded, the master deed, all the recorded bylaws and amendments. I took them home and spread them across my dining room table. What started as a casual look-see quickly turned into a deep dive. There were financial statements that were vague at best, and meeting minutes that seemed suspiciously perfect. Too perfect. Every vote was unanimous. Every motion passed without debate. And then I found the first real red flag. An amendment from about 5 years ago, one that hadn't been in the welcome binder Cynthia gave me. It gave the HOA president unilateral authority to approve contracts under $5,000 without board approval. Wow. No wonder Gary and Brenda just went along with everything. Cynthia was writing the checks. The next front opened over the path to my dock. My property line, according to the official survey I had from the sale, ran right to the water's edge. The small flagstone path that led from my back deck to the dock was entirely on my land. But a few days after I moved in, I saw a couple I didn't recognize walking their dog down the path, letting their dog do its business right by my dock. I went out and politely explained that it was private property. They were apologetic and said, "Oh, sorry." Cynthia told everyone this was a community access path. Unbelievable. The very next morning, a Saturday, 10:57 a.m., I was installing a small, tasteful private property, no trespassing sign at the head of the path. Before I had even finished screwing it into the post, Cynthia was marching across my lawn. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "That is community property. You can't put that sign there." I calmly replied, "Actually, Cynthia, according to the official survey and my deed, this is my property. All of it." I held up a copy of my survey. She didn't even glance at it. Her face turned a blotchy red. "I am the HOA president," she hissed, as if that trumped a legal document. "And I am telling you, that path is for everyone. You take that sign down right now, or I will have it removed and fine you for every day it's up. And if I see you trying to stop residents from using it, I will call the police and have you arrested for harassment." Dude, the sheer audacity. She was threatening to have me arrested for enforcing my own property rights. That's when I knew this was going to get ugly. I just looked her in the eye and said, "I don't think you want to do that, Cynthia." Then I turned my back on her and finished securing the sign. The battle lines were officially drawn. It felt like we'd just gone through a whole year's worth of tickets and fines, and we were only getting started. The final showdown happened exactly 1 week later. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, 9:37 a.m. I was down on my dock, enjoying the quiet, just tightening a few loose boards. The private property sign stood proud and defiant at the top of the path. For a few days, it seemed to have worked. Neighbors would see it and turn back. The peace was palpable. But I knew it was the calm before the storm. A storm named Cynthia. Sure enough, I heard her before I saw her. The familiar sound of self-righteous fury crunching on gravel. I looked up the path, and there she was, phone already pressed to her ear. She was wearing a matching pastel tracksuit, the official uniform of suburban tyrants everywhere. "Yes, 911? I'd like to report a trespasser. He's on HOA community property, and he's being very aggressive." She was putting on a full theatrical performance, her voice trembling with fake fear. "He's refusing to leave. I'm a HOA president. I'm just trying to protect our community. Please, you have to send someone quickly. I'm afraid of what he might do." Wow. Just wow. This officer is unbelievable, I thought to myself. She saw me watching her, a smug little smirk playing on her lips as she ended the call. "The police are on their way," she announced, crossing her arms. "You're in real trouble now. They don't take kindly to squatters around here." I just leaned against the dock piling and waited. I wasn't worried. Annoyed, yes, but not worried. I'd spent 30 years on the other side of calls like this. I knew exactly how it was going to play out. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights were cutting through the peaceful morning, reflecting off the lake. 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb in front of my cabin. A younger officer, looking earnest and ready for action, got out of the first car. A more seasoned sergeant, probably in his late 40s with a calm, seen-it-all demeanor, emerged from the second. Cynthia practically ran to them, launching into her prepared speech. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, officers," she gushed. "That man," she pointed a dramatic finger at me, "is on our community access path and he's illegally installed that sign. He's squatting on HOA property and became belligerent when I confronted him. He needs to be removed immediately." The young officer looked at me, then back at Cynthia, a serious expression on his face. The sergeant, however, just listened patiently, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the sign, my cabin, me. He started walking down the path toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. Cynthia trotted alongside him, still chattering. I have the bylaws right here. He's in clear violation. I want to press charges for trespassing and vandalism for that sign. As the sergeant got closer, I saw his eyes fix on my face. He stopped about 10 feet away from me. He squinted for a second. A look of confusion, then dawning recognition, washed over his face. "Chief," he said, his voice quiet with disbelief. "Chief Miller? John Miller? Is that you?" Cynthia's frantic monologue screeched to a halt. Her mouth was literally hanging open. The younger officer looked at his sergeant, then back at me, utterly bewildered. I gave the sergeant a small, tired smile. "Hey, Mark. Didn't expect to see you out in my neck of the woods. How's the wife?" Sergeant Mark Brody. He'd been a rookie when I was a captain, and I'd mentored him for years. A damn good cop. He broke into a wide grin. "She's great, Chief. Kids are driving us crazy. I had no idea you'd moved out here." He turned to the younger officer. "This is John Miller. He was my chief for the last 10 years before he retired. Basically taught me everything I know about police work." The young officer's posture immediately changed. He stood up a little straighter, his eyes wide. "Sir," he said, nodding his head at me respectfully. Then, almost as an unconscious reflex from his academy days, his hand twitched and he gave me a short, crisp salute. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen all week. Sergeant Brody then turned his full attention to Cynthia. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a stern, professional cop face that I knew all too well. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Did you just call 911 to report the former chief of police for trespassing on his own property?" Cynthia was sputtering, her face a kaleidoscope of confusion, anger, and humiliation. But the path, it's community land. The HOA? Mark held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I don't care what your binder says. I see a private property sign, and I see the homeowner standing on his dock. This is a civil matter, not a police emergency. You wasted our time and tied up an emergency line with a bogus call. You're lucky I'm not writing you a citation for misuse of 911 right now. Do not call us for this again. Are we clear?" She just stared at him, speechless. He gave me a final nod. "Good to see you, Chief. Sorry for the disturbance." And with that, they turned and walked back to their cars, leaving Cynthia standing there, her face the color of spoiled ham. The war wasn't over, but man, I had just won a major battle. That 911 call was the point of no return. Up until then, it had been a frustrating, almost comical battle of wills. But when Cynthia weaponized the very emergency service system I had dedicated my life to building and upholding, just to bully me over a few feet of flagstone path, it became personal. This wasn't about property lines anymore. It was about abuse of power. I poured myself a cup of coffee that morning, my hand steady. The anger I felt was cold and focused. I wasn't going to get even. I was going to get justice. For me, for the Hendersons, for the family she ran out of town over a swing set. I was going to dismantle Cynthia's little kingdom of tyranny, brick by beige brick. So I went back to the paperwork. But this time, I wasn't just a curious homeowner. I was Chief Miller again, running a full-blown investigation. I called in a favor from an old friend, a guy named Dave, who was a retired forensic accountant from our white-collar crime unit. 11 a.m. on a Monday, he was sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by 5 years of HOA bank statements, invoices, and contracts that I'd formally requested and, after some initial resistance, received. "All right, John," Dave said, sipping his coffee. "Let's see what this queen of the cul-de-sac has been up to." For 2 days, we worked. We traced every penny. And boy, did we find things. There were landscaping invoices from a company called Cynthia's Blooms. A quick search revealed the company was registered to Cynthia's cousin. The invoices were 30% higher than any competitor in the area. There was a $10,000 expenditure for a community security upgrade, which turned out to be a state-of-the-art camera and alarm system installed exclusively at Cynthia's house. There were recurring consulting fees paid to a company that, after a little digging, we found was a shell corporation registered to Cynthia's maiden name. She was skimming, bleeding the community dry with 1,000 little cuts. But the smoking gun, the real deed of 2023, as I started to think of it, was buried in the records from 4 years prior. It was related to the very path she was so obsessed with. I found a record of a special assessment levied on all homeowners. The purpose? To acquire and maintain community waterfront access. The HOA had paid $50,000 for it. And who did they buy it from? A landholding company. A landholding company owned by Cynthia Smith. She had sold a tiny sliver of land to the HOA for an astronomical price. But here was the kicker. They've pulled the official property records from the county. The deed for that sliver of land was never actually transferred to the HOA. She took the 50 grand, but the land was still legally in her company's name, which means it had eventually been absorbed into my plot when I bought the property. She was trying to enforce community access to land she had already been paid for by the community, but still technically owned and had now sold to me. It was multi-layered, audacious fraud. Man, it was shocking. And to top it off, I found the meeting minutes where the board unanimously approved the purchase. I cross-referenced the signatures with other documents. Gary's and Brenda's were real. But the third board member listed at the time, a woman who had since moved away, her signature was a clear forgery. Cynthia had faked it to push the deal through. We had her, cold. With a mountain of evidence in a neat, organized binder of my own, I was ready to make my move. This couldn't just be me against her. It had to be the community. 7 p.m. on a Thursday night, I held a discreet meeting at the Hendersons' house. I invited 5 other families who had quietly expressed their frustrations to me over the past few weeks. They were nervous, huddled in the living room, speaking in hushed tones. They'd lived under Cynthia's thumb for so long, they were conditioned to fear her. I didn't give a big, rousing speech. I just laid out the facts. I had copies of everything. The inflated invoices from her cousin, the proof she'd used HOA money for her personal security system, the bank records for her shell corporation. And then I presented the grand finale, the evidence of the fraudulent land deal. I showed them the $50,000 payment. The land registry documents proving the deed was never transferred, and the forged signature on the meeting minutes. You could have heard a pin drop. The fear in that room slowly, beautifully, transformed into righteous anger. Mary Henderson's hand went to her mouth. "That thief," she whispered. "All those special assessments, we could barely afford them. It was for this?" Another man, who'd been fined repeatedly for his work truck being parked in his own driveway for 5 minutes too long, just shook his head, his face a grim mask. "It's time," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's time to take our neighborhood back." We spent the next 2 hours planning. We used the HOA's own bylaws against her, finding the clause that allowed a certain percentage of homeowners to call for a special emergency meeting of the entire association. We drafted the notice that very night. We weren't just going to vote her out. We were going to expose her in front of everyone she had bullied for years. The date was set for the following Wednesday evening. Judgment Day was coming for Cynthia. The night of the special meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. I hadn't seen this many people together since the 4th of July barbecue. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Word had clearly gotten around. People were whispering, passing around copies of the meeting notice we'd distributed. Cynthia, Brenda, and Gary sat at a table at the front, looking annoyed and imperious. Cynthia, in particular, looked like she was ready for a fight. She opened the meeting at exactly 7 p.m. "I'd like to call this emergency meeting to order," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Apparently, a small but vocal group has some concerns. I'd like to remind everyone that our board is volunteer-run, and we do our best to. Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, stood up. He wasn't a loud man, but his voice was firm. We're not here to talk about your best, Cynthia. We're here to talk about your theft. A gasp went through the room. Cynthia's face went white, then purple. How dare you? That is a slanderous accusation. That was my cue. I stood up, a remote for a projector in my hand. It's not slander, Cynthia, if it's true. I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen behind her. It was a copy of an invoice from Cynthia's Blooms, right next to quotes from 3 other local landscapers for the same job, all for significantly less. Let's start with the landscaping contract you awarded to your cousin's company, I said, my voice calm and even, just like I was giving a briefing back at the precinct. For the next 20 minutes, I walked the entire community through Cynthia's reign of fraud. Slide by slide, I laid it all out. The $10,000 community security system installed at her house. The bank statements from her shell corporation showing deposits that matched, to the dollar, consulting fees from the HOA account. With each slide, the murmuring in the room grew louder. Brenda and Gary looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. They were frantically whispering to Cynthia, who was just staring at the screen, her mouth agape. Then I got to the grand finale, the fraudulent land deal. I put up the $50,000 check record, the deed showing she never transferred the property, and a blow-up of the forged signature next to the board member's real signature from another document. The match wasn't even close. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting, "Thief! Give us our money back!" Cynthia finally snapped. She jumped to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Lies! These are all lies. This is a conspiracy. He's a troublemaker. He's been trying to undermine this community since the day he moved in. You can't believe this criminal." Dude, it was a spectacular meltdown, a Karen supernova, but no one was buying it. The evidence was right there, projected 10 feet high for everyone to see. Mr. Henderson called for a vote of no confidence to immediately remove Cynthia, Brenda, and Gary from the board. The show of hands was nearly unanimous. It was a sea of righteous victory. As Cynthia was screaming that the vote was illegal, the double doors at the back of the clubhouse opened. And standing there, looking calm and official, was Sergeant Mark Brody and a detective in a suit. "Cynthia Smith?" Mark said, his voice carrying easily over the din. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." The collective gasp in the room was followed by dead silence. Every single person turned to watch as the detective walked calmly to the front of the room, took Cynthia's arm, and cuffed her hands behind her back. The clicking sound of the handcuffs echoed in the silent room. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Her reign was over. Not with a whimper, but with the satisfying clink of justice. After she was led away, still shrieking about her rights and her lawyer, the community just sort of exhaled. The tension that had held Lakeview Meadows captive for years finally broke. People were hugging each other. Mary Henderson was crying with relief. It was a new day. In the aftermath, I was asked to step in as the interim HOA president. I agreed on the condition that my only job was to dissolve the old power structure and hire a professional, third-party management company to handle things ethically and transparently. We rewrote the most ridiculous bylaws. You can now have a gnome of any size you wish. And we put checks and balances in place to ensure no one person could ever wield that kind of power again. Brenda and Gary, facing potential legal trouble themselves, cooperated fully with the investigation. Cynthia, faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence, ended up taking a plea deal. She had to pay back over $100,000 in restitution to the HOA and served 18 months in prison. We used that restitution money to finally build a beautiful new playground for the community's kids. Right where the Jacksons had wanted to put their swing set, we dedicated it to them. My life at the lake is quiet now. It's everything I dreamed it would be. I fish, I read, I listen to the loons. Sometimes, when I'm out on my dock at 7:14 a.m., coffee in hand, I think about the whole ordeal. It took a whole year's worth of fines, one deep-dive title search, uncovering a bogus permit, and a lot of drama. But we finally got our deed to a peaceful neighborhood. And every now and then, I'll see a patrol car drive by, and the officer behind the wheel will give a little nod or a wave. And I just smile. My little piece of heaven was worth the fight.